That night, it all started with something as small as pasta. My wife put a pot of spaghetti on the stove, filled it with water, sprinkled in some salt the same way she always did, and then did something I had never seen her do in 10 years of living together in that apartment. She turned toward the wall where we had never hung a clock. Not once. Not even a nail hole. There had never been a clock there. We always joked about it. But she stared at it, waiting. Her eyes flicked to that empty spot every few seconds, expectant, as if she were checking something. Timing something. Mirroring some routine that didn't belong in our home. That tiny movement was wrong. People don't stare at walls for no reason. They stare at clocks. They stare at screens. They stare at objects they've formed habits around. But here? There was nothing. And that was the moment the question rose in my throat so naturally I didn't even think. Who is he? Because the glance wasn't hers. The reflex wasn't born here. It belonged to another kitchen, another wall, another life she lived somewhere else. She didn't know it yet, but her biggest mistake wasn't cheating. It wasn't lying. It was slipping back into the habits she formed with him. Before that moment, I had only suspicions. Nothing concrete. Nothing I could screenshot or photograph. Just a quiet, nagging feeling that something was off. The late-night showers. The sudden interest in her appearance on days she wasn't meeting anyone. The strange smiles over text, quickly flipped face down when I entered the room. But none of it compared to that single glance at an invisible clock. That was real. That was instinct. And instinct doesn't lie. She kept stirring the pasta, humming to herself delicately, unaware that the ground beneath her was already crumbling. I watched her movements, not because I enjoyed the domestic scene, but because I was studying a stranger wearing my wife's face. When I asked the question, calmly, almost gently, she simply blinked, confused. She tilted her head, as if I had spoken in another language. She couldn't understand what I meant. In her mind, nothing unusual had happened. That was what confirmed it even more. Guilty people who are aware of their guilt panic. Guilty people who have lived two lives for too long forget which one they're in. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse her of anything. I didn't need to. I knew the truth already. Now I just wanted to watch her realize it. She laughed nervously, brushed off the question, told me I was imagining things. But her hand trembled when she reached for the oregano. And that tremble? That was fear. Not fear of punishment. Fear of being discovered. I leaned against the counter, observing her. Not angrily, strategically. Her world depended on me believing her lies. The moment she sensed I no longer did, cracks began to form. She tried to redirect the conversation. Asked about my day. The usual tactic of people who want to bury something under small talk. But even then, she slipped. She asked questions she had asked the day before, as if she couldn't keep track of which version of the conversation belonged to which man. I noticed everything. And in that silence between us, something shifted. She kept glancing at the empty wall. Every time she did, her pupils tightened. Every time she caught herself, her breath hitched. It didn't take long for the timer on her phone to go off, a habit she never used before. She always relied on instinct for cooking, but this time she needed exact minutes. Another man cooked with a timer. Another man had a clock on the wall. Another man dictated how she boiled pasta. I stood there, holding all the pieces she didn't know she had given me, fitting them together with a kind of cold clarity I hadn't felt in months. And when she finally realized I wasn't asking casually, when she saw that something in my expression was different, that's when her face changed. Not guilty. Not apologetic. Scared. She still didn't know what she had done wrong. She just knew she had done something. And fear makes people reveal things faster than guilt ever will. She asked why I said that. I told her she'd figure it out. Those words alone made her crumble. The unknown was more terrifying to her than any accusation. Because only guilty people fear the unknown. I walked to the living room while she kept stirring the pasta, trying to breathe steadily, trying to think back over the last days, weeks, months, trying to find the moment she slipped. But it wasn't a moment. It was 100 small moments. And tonight, one of them finally surfaced. One look at a wall that had never held a clock. One instinct she didn't even know she performed. One tiny detail that told me everything. She still didn't understand. And that was the worst part for her. Because when a man asks, "Who is he?" he never asks randomly. He asks because he already knows. Betrayal rarely announces itself with fireworks. It creeps in quietly, wearing the face of normalcy, hiding inside gestures so small they almost escape notice. That night, I realized I wasn't discovering an affair. I was stepping into the shadow of a second life she'd been living without me. After she placed the pasta on the stove and kept glancing at the empty wall, I didn't explode or demand explanations. Her confusion was far more revealing than panic ever could be. She wasn't scrambling to defend herself because she didn't yet know which thread had begun to unravel. That uncertainty worked in my favor. I moved to the living room while she finished cooking, letting the pieces fall into place in silence. For years I had watched her move around our home with the comfort of habit. Now, every movement felt borrowed, foreign, like she was reenacting instructions someone else had once given her. The timer on her phone. The careful stirring. The subconscious search for a clock that had never existed here. None of it belonged to her original rhythm. Someone else had taught her this choreography. When she finally brought me the plate, her hands betrayed her far more than her words. She hovered near me, pretending to adjust the napkin or check the temperature of the pasta, but really she was studying my expression, searching for hints of what I had uncovered. Her eyes were too bright, too alert. She was smiling, but the muscles in her face strained to hold the shape. She ate almost nothing, though she insisted she wasn't hungry. Each time I looked at her, she looked away, then forced another attempt at casual conversation, questions repeated from the day before, as if she couldn't remember which man she had asked them to originally. She wasn't juggling a lie, she was juggling two lives, and the weight of both had begun to crush her composure. Later, when the house quieted, she climbed into bed and lay beside me without touching me, another new habit she probably hadn't noticed she'd brought home. When she thought I had fallen asleep, she carefully slid out of the covers and sat at the edge of the mattress. Her phone glowed in her hands. She typed something, paused, erased the whole message, typed again, deleted again. She stared at the screen like she was searching for courage but couldn't locate it anywhere inside herself. She never sent the message. Fear held her fingers still. She stayed frozen there for a long time, as though moving too quickly would shatter whatever story she thought she could still save. Eventually, she returned to bed, her breathing shallow and uneven. She didn't sleep, she only pretended to. Pretending had become her comfort now. I slept. Not peacefully, but with purpose. I needed clarity, not emotion. By morning, she had transformed into the overly cheerful version of herself she used whenever she sensed danger. She offered to make breakfast, brewed coffee she never drank, and tried to fill the room with light, meaningless chatter, anything to keep the silence away. Silence worried her. Silence forced her to confront the possibility that I had seen too much. Every time I glanced at the kitchen wall, she stiffened. Her eyes flicked to me, then to the blank spot, then back to the counter. She didn't know why the wall mattered, but she sensed that it did. That alone made her uneasy. When she stepped into the shower, steam curling under the bathroom door, I finally turned to something she had forgotten about months ago. Her iCloud remained logged in on the laptop she thought I rarely touched. She wasn't careless. She was simply used to being trusted. There were no obvious confessions. No explicit photographs or messages. She had deleted everything that could incriminate her. But people leave trails even when they think they're being meticulous. There were gaps in conversations, full days missing from threads that were previously constant. There were Uber receipts that didn't match her usual routines, restaurant locations she'd never mentioned, reminders cleared immediately after triggering. But the most telling detail was small, almost laughably insignificant. A notification from 3 months earlier titled, "Timer for Pasta." She had cooked pasta for a decade without ever setting a timer. She trusted her instincts, yet suddenly she followed strict minutes like someone had retrained her. Someone else boiled pasta precisely. Someone else had a clock on his kitchen wall. Someone else dictated the rhythms she brought back into our home. That reminder connected every piece. Her glance at the empty wall wasn't random. It was muscle memory. She wasn't checking my wall. She was checking his. I closed the laptop, feeling no need to confront her immediately. Anger wouldn't help. Rage never uncovers truth, it only hides it. What I needed was quiet certainty. I needed her to remain unaware of what I had pieced together. So I behaved exactly as she hoped I would. I kissed her forehead before leaving for work. I answered her messages with warmth. I let her believe she still knew how to play her role convincingly. Letting her feel safe was essential. People who think they've escaped suspicion always make the fatal mistake of relaxing. And people who relax slip deeper into habits they've tried so hard to hide. She would slip again. She couldn't help it. A double life always demands more than a person can sustain. And she was already exhausted. People always imagine that the moment of discovery arrives like a lightning strike, loud, dramatic, impossible to ignore. But the truth is quieter. It slips in through unnoticed cracks, settling into the corners of a life that once felt predictable. And once it settles, it starts rearranging everything. Over the next few days, I kept my routine unchanged. I went to work, returned home at the usual times, and treated her with the same calm familiarity she was used to. I didn't accuse. I didn't search her things again. I didn't hover or act strangely. I simply watched. She had no idea how revealing it is when someone overcorrects their behavior. The guilt in her eyes didn't surface in explosions, it surfaced in small, frantic attempts to look normal. She cleaned parts of the house she had ignored for years. She cooked with enthusiasm she didn't genuinely feel. She asked about my day more often, leaning forward as if absorbing every detail. But real interest isn't that mechanical. Real curiosity isn't that rehearsed. Her smiles had become too sharp around the edges. Her laughter carried the stiffness of someone afraid of silence. Her kindness was no longer kindness, it was a performance crafted for survival. She didn't know what she was trying to survive, but she felt the threat of something she couldn't define. That unsettled her more than any direct accusation could have. I could see her mind working constantly, tracing back through memories, trying to locate the misstep she couldn't remember making. She replayed conversations, recounted our routines, searched for anything unusual. The stress hollowed her eyes a little more each day. Still, she never asked what I'd meant that night when I questioned her. People don't ask about the things they fear discovering. And then it happened, the moment she finally slipped without even noticing she had done it. It was a Thursday evening, ordinary by every external measure. I came home to the faint smell of detergent and lemon. She had scrubbed the entire kitchen, an act that wasn't about cleanliness but about distraction. She greeted me with a bright smile, overly sweet, and busied herself preparing dinner. I watched her move. Every step looked careful, too careful, like she was walking through a room full of fragile memories she couldn't risk cracking. While she chopped vegetables, her phone vibrated on the counter, a short, light buzz. She froze. Just for a second. Not long enough for the unobservant to notice, but long enough for me to see her mind buckle under the weight of panic. She didn't reach for it immediately. She pretended to stay occupied. She stirred the pot, wiped her hands on a towel that didn't need wiping, repositioned a spoon that didn't need adjusting. All of it pointless movement meant to delay the moment she dreaded. She finally checked the notification when she thought I wasn't looking. She tilted the screen away from me, blocking my view. Her shoulders curled inward. Her breath hitched. Her thumb hovered over the message, then closed it quickly, not deleting it, just hiding it. She thought she was being careful. But her reaction alone was enough. Whoever he was, he had contacted her. The presence she feared wasn't an illusion. She regained her composure as best she could and served dinner like nothing had happened. She asked me a question about work, something shallow and safe, but her eyes kept drifting toward the hallway where her phone lay charging. She wasn't really with me at the table. Half of her had already slipped away, pulled toward another life she'd tried to bury. After dinner, I suggested we watch something. A harmless offer, the kind we had exchanged years earlier without thinking. She agreed too quickly. People who lie often accept every suggestion, they think compliance buys them time. We sat on the couch, the screen flickering in front of us, casting soft light across her face. She kept shifting in place, pretending to watch, pretending to laugh at moments she didn't hear. Her attention wasn't here, it was darting back to the notification she'd hidden. She couldn't sit still. Guilt rarely sits comfortably. Halfway through the film, she excused herself, claiming she had laundry to fold. I let her go. I didn't follow. I didn't eavesdrop. I didn't need to. She disappeared into the bedroom and closed the door behind her, not fully, just enough to create a barrier she hoped wouldn't look suspicious. Soft footsteps moved across the floor. A whisper of clothing. The sound of a phone being unplugged. She was texting him. I didn't need the words to know. What fascinated me wasn't the betrayal itself, it was the gradual collapse of her confidence. She had been so certain she could manage both worlds. But now, every small movement gave her away. Every glance, every pause, every breath carried the tension of someone waiting for a disaster she couldn't name. The gap between who she pretended to be and who she had become was widening by the hour. I stayed where I was, letting her believe I remained absorbed by the movie. My silence allowed her to reveal herself with increasing clarity. Eventually she returned, her expression composed but fragile. She sat beside me, closer than usual, almost leaning into my shoulder, as if closeness could soften suspicion. Her hand brushed mine. The gesture felt rehearsed, not instinctive. She was trying too hard. People in love do things naturally. People hiding secrets plan every move. I didn't reject her touch, nor did I return it with warmth. Neutrality unnerved her more than anger ever could. She kept glancing at me, waiting for some sign that everything was fine. Her breathing changed depending on whether I appeared relaxed or simply indifferent. The entire evening became a quiet battle between her attempts to calm herself and the fear that I had already seen the truth. And I had. What she didn't know was that the worst consequences of betrayal don't come from being caught. They come from realizing you were caught long before you understood how. The walls around her were shifting. The floor beneath her was thinning. And she didn't know which movement of hers would finally give her away. But she would find out. And the next part of this story would be the moment she realized that I no longer needed to ask, "Who is he?" Because by then, I would already know. The end didn't arrive with an argument. It didn't come from rage or suspicion or a sudden moment of clarity. It came from silence. The kind of silence that settles into a home when one person finally understands the truth and the other realizes they can no longer hide from it. By the time the next weekend arrived, I had stopped waiting for more evidence. I didn't need messages or photos or some dramatic confession. The truth had revealed itself in 100 small gestures, glances at a wall that never held a clock, the tremble in her fingers, the panic whenever her phone buzzed, the sudden sweetness that belonged more to fear than affection. She woke that morning with a tension she tried to disguise. She offered breakfast with bright eyes that didn't match the shadows underneath. She moved through the house with soft footsteps, as if walking carefully might prevent the inevitable. But she felt something shifting. She sensed a storm without knowing its shape. I let her continue the performance for most of the morning. She pretended to clean, pretended to plan a weekend together, pretended not to check her phone every few minutes. Each little act of pretending chipped away at her composure. By midday, she was exhausted from the effort. That was when I finally ended the silence. I didn't raise my voice or corner her. I didn't accuse her or produce evidence. I didn't demand explanations. Instead, I simply sat across from her at the kitchen table, the same table where we had once shared 1,000 uncomplicated meals, and I watched her. Not with suspicion. Not with confusion. With clarity. That alone was enough to unravel her. She asked if something was wrong. She tried to sound casual, but the words caught in her throat. She tried again, asking the question more gently, more carefully, but her voice cracked at the edges. She had been bracing herself for days. Now the weight finally pressed down. I didn't list her mistakes. I didn't recite the details. I didn't mention the reminder on her phone or the deleted messages or the Uber locations that didn't belong to our life. I told her only one thing, that I knew. And the moment the words reached her, she broke. Not dramatically. There was no shouting, no denial, no sudden collapse into tears. Instead, she froze, completely, like a person confronted with an image of herself she no longer recognized. Her breathing became shallow. Her pupils tightened. Her hands curled against the table. For a long time, she tried to hold herself together. She swallowed, straightened her back, attempted to force calm into her voice. She insisted nothing had happened, but the insistence was hollow. She tried to explain her strange behaviors as misunderstandings, but each explanation contradicted the last. She said she didn't know why she seemed distracted, why she looked at the empty wall, why she had been acting off. But lies don't survive prolonged silence. The longer she spoke, the more her words tangled. The more they tangled, the more her fear surfaced. Eventually, her voice wavered. A tremor ran through her shoulders. She looked at me in a way she never had before, not with guilt, but with recognition. Recognition that the version of me she thought she could deceive was gone. She finally asked how I knew. And I told her the truth. Not how. When. I didn't mention the phone, the reminders, the messages. I told her only about the pasta, the moment she glanced at a wall where no clock had ever hung, the moment she repeated habits that didn't belong to this house, the moment instinct betrayed her. Her face drained of color. In that instant, she understood that the betrayal wasn't exposed by technology or some dramatic slip. It was exposed by something far worse, the residue of another life she had lived somewhere else. She tried to explain. She tried to backtrack, to offer excuses, to claim she hadn't meant for things to go that far. None of it mattered. Not because I refused to listen, but because the explanations had arrived too late. She was speaking from a place of fear, not honesty. And fear never produces truth. I didn't comfort her. I didn't touch her hand or offer forgiveness. I didn't punish her either. I simply laid out, with calm finality, what was going to happen next. There would be no screaming match, no dramatic breakup scene. There would simply be distance. Emotional, physical, practical. I wasn't going to stay in a life where I had become an accessory to someone else's story. Her reaction wasn't dramatic, it was quiet devastation. Her shoulders collapsed inward. Her breath hitched in small, broken fragments. She reached for me instinctively, as if proximity could rewrite the past, but I stepped away before she touched me. That was what finally shattered her. She kept saying she didn't want to lose me. The words spilled out in disordered fragments. She insisted she had made a mistake, that she was confused, that she'd cut him off. She offered promises she wasn't equipped to keep. But none of it changed the truth. The version of us she wanted back no longer existed. I walked away from the table, leaving her sitting there with her hands trembling against the wood. She stayed frozen for a long time, staring at the empty wall she used to glance at out of habit, the wall that had exposed everything. Eventually she whispered one question into the silence, desperate, small, barely audible. What did she do wrong? And the answer was simple. She let another man's world bleed into mine.